We all have cherished memories from gaming. Some are from the games that we play, and some are from the people who play them. So what are your favorite gaming moments, and what makes a moment special in a game? Is it technology, the plot, the game's community, or one of the many other things that go to make a game?
Welcome to the Gentleland Show, where we talk about game development, design, and culture. It's your access to all things in the games industry. We're your guides.
Hey, I'm Jacky, founder of Gentleland, computer scientist, and digital artist.
I'm Edwin, a composer, sound designer, and opera singer.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, a business and marketing expert and a co-founder at Gentleland.
You know, sometimes I'm wondering, what is it that makes a game unforgettable? Is it like the character, story, mechanics, or maybe something even deeper, like a combination of elements that resonate with each player individually? One commonality of memorable games, at least for me, seems to be the ability to tell really compelling, interesting stories. The connection a player feels that goes just beyond the screen, that kind of stays with you really long after you have played the game. Also, I find games that break the fourth wall and engage you fundamentally on a different level are really so memorable to me. I specifically feel really strongly about games like PT, where you had to find almost like some out-of-the-game clues to make it work as a community. And these games tend to have the ability to make me question my actions and even their morality.
In my childhood, a memorable game moment is when I was experiencing a game for the first time. So a really old and very memorable game for me was Duck Hunt on the Nintendo Entertainment System, where you had this plastic gun that you would point at the TV and the duck would fly around. And that was so different for me compared to something like Super Mario Brothers, because it was like I wasn't even holding a controller anymore at that point. I was physically pointing a gun at an old TV. So that was just kind of really interesting. And I know I talk about Super Mario Brothers a lot, but also really experiencing a platformer for the first time, just trying not to fall into a hole or not trying to fall into things or bump into the enemies and pick up power-ups was just like a very strange, memorable experience. And I think that even modern-ish era games such as Guitar Hero or Halo, Wii Bowling, Pokemon Go, Dance Dance Revolution, things like that are all quite memorable because of the originality of the game design and mechanics.
For me, many memorable game moments happen behind the scenes while developing games. And it's kind of when you realize that games are like a box of candy that are supposed to create this illusion for a player. I'm thinking of really old games like Zelda, where you have like a bartender and you think as a player, wow, this dude has a complete body behind the counter. And then when you see the game in the engine, you just know, oh, okay, this bartender only has an upper body just to save a few polygons to optimize the scene. And I always think of one famous example, which was a train you could ride in Fallout 3 that is actually just an NPC who is wearing a hat, and the hat is the train itself. And yeah, Sims 2 did something similar as well, by having cars remote controlled via an invisible sim that was roaming around. And while this knowledge is really fun to have as a game developer, it also sometimes kind of steals the magic of a game. And when I think about it from an artistic and game developer perspective, iconic characters often really play a large role in making a game memorable, at least for me. So I'm thinking of the silhouette of a Pikachu. I'm thinking about Mario. I'm thinking about, like Lara Croft. And great characters are, for me at least, relatable and yet larger than life, with a well-crafted arc that make players feel really emotionally invested in their journey.
So for me in The Legend of Zelda, it was this moment where you could get different equipment and different items, and that would have different attacks and different utility in the world, and it would change the state of the world. That to me was very memorable and very interesting. I just didn't think at that point, as a kid, that I could go around the overworld and the underworld in the Zelda universe and find all these cool things and have it change so much of the gameplay in the dungeon and unlock different things. But really, that is, in its essence, kind of what The Legend of Zelda as a series does. It allows players to unlock secrets. And I always feel like I'm in anticipation of these secrets, what twists and turns the game will reveal as I play, which is very cool. And I think even recently with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they not only expanded on like the game mechanics of The Legend of Zelda and also the series lore itself, but it gave players a whole new way to experience the game mechanic within the world of Hyrule. And so that was also kind of like so interesting for me because Nintendo was innovating on not just the core game mechanics, but also innovating on what we thought a Legend of Zelda game could even do.
Yeah, it's very interesting hearing you talk about how that's making a game memorable, because I think when a game pushes the envelope or when it feels like it's innovating, then that actually can have very deep significance for the person playing that game if they've been with the series for a while. I think actually there's a core aspect to all of the memories we're talking about so far, whether it's characters, emotional arcs, or just technological innovations. And I think they all share one aspect, which is emotion. And if these things aren't getting emotion out of you, you're probably just not going to remember them. And I love this discussion because, in a way, this is a discussion about ways that a game can just evoke strong emotions in its players.
A big concern for me these days is that most games are basically the same. They're all walking simulators or a collection of fetch quests with a little bit of RNG. They're basically all cookie clickers. Obviously, I'm generalizing here, but I am worried that games aren't very memorable anymore. And, I'm not trying to be very inflammatory or anything, but what really is so memorable about Fortnite?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I haven't spent that long with Fortnite, but I find your comment in general quite true. Like the next Call of Duty title or the next FIFA title, there's very skilled game design and development behind them. But when I look at an online game as some abstract, standalone artifact, there isn't probably that much there in each progressive iteration of those series to create a strong memory on its own. And actually, if I look back on my own memory of Call of Duty, for example, some of the franchise just sort of blur into each other. Like sometimes I can't remember if I did something in Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2. I certainly remember enjoying them. I remember the campaigns did have a few memorable moments where the narrative, things came together really nicely. However, I am sure that a lot of listeners will have strong memories about how they interacted within these online games with other people. I remember one time I was playing Heroes Ascent in Guild Wars 1, so for some background, I wasn't very good at PvP in Guild Wars, by the way, and for whatever reason, there was a very low player count on the server I was playing in at this particular time. Heroes Ascent was tough, I think, by any online gaming standards to do well there. It's pretty tough. So I got a team randomly together, we won a couple of battles, and then my team just skipped about 6 stages because there was nobody to fight against to the elite final PvP arena called the Hall of Heroes. And that was about 17 years ago, but to this day I remember what the Hall of Heroes looked like and some of the comments that my confused teammates made because, the whole team was just confused and it felt very special to be in this area.
When you just ask what really is memorable about Fortnite, I actually have a really memorable event. I never really played Fortnite, but that one time I played it, it was at a convention in Berlin. And there was a desk and, a friend at the time was like, oh, Jacky, let's try out this game. And we played it for 10 minutes. And in these 10 minutes, what happened to me was I played the game, thought this is fun. Got run over by a truck, I believe, and then got dragged into a gas station and was lit on fire with the gas station somehow.
Wow.
And that was, honestly, that was very memorable to me. It wasn't memorable in a good way, but it definitely was, I still remember it and never touched the game ever again. So, do you know this feeling when gameplay just feels like magic? Sometimes the game becomes memorable purely because of how it plays, or, if you get dragged into a gas station, right? For me, a great game often invites players to lose themselves in its world. I love a good environmental storytelling. And whenever I worked on a game, I usually at some point added in some really interesting details. And if you have worked with me, I'm sorry, I have to confess, there's probably a penguin or 2 in your game now.
Nice.
But telling stories through architecture, audio, or haunting atmosphere, I feel at its core, players don't just explore games, they uncover its history piece by piece. And this could be, something that's in plain sight, but you don't see it. It could be a character that has a penguin keychain or, these really small details where you then just feel oh, wow, this person has some really interesting backstory.
There's definitely moments when I wonder to myself if all the game mechanics are already used up and games are just not really memorable anymore.
Nowadays, I'm way more picky regarding what types of games I want to play. And I remember most memorable moments have always been together with friends in games. I was usually playing MMOs or games where I'm very stereotypical supporter type of gamer. And when I was younger, I played lots of Ragnarok Online. And it was just so fun because for me, that game, I was playing it on private servers. But they were really difficult private servers where I played on. So I kind of had a hardcore experience. And you had to have friends in order to beat like the hardest bosses. And I remember we were a group of maybe 20 people attacking a boss, and I accidentally hit the wrong key. And I basically ruined the experience for everyone else by accident. So we had like 20 plus people back in the day screaming in all languages, Chinese, English, German, in back in the day TeamSpeak. And I was so afraid I actually Alt F4'd out of the game in the hopes no one would notice that it was me. So I'm still feeling a bit of a sense of shame around that, but that was never on purpose. And at one point it was forgiven and forgotten, I hope. Not for everyone, but for some. But these kind of moments just stick it with you. And nowadays, I want to say I don't get so invested or so deep anymore into games. Maybe that's just of my lifestyle changing. But as someone who's spent countless hours just curating, supporting, and creating games, I've come to realize that the most memorable gaming moments kind of transcend mechanics or graphics. And it's when I have a feeling a game will not fulfill on this promise, I just tend to not be that interested anymore. I also believe that these moments that are really deep, they matter a lot because they demonstrate the potential of games as a medium. When you see games in this day, they are still often dismissed as kind of just trivial entertainment. And I feel we can already start challenging that perception because they make you feel or even help you reflect sometimes or even change your perspective on life. Nowadays, some even feel like it's a medium for propaganda. And it's also something that can just inspire me as a developer.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to a game developer who decided to work on the EVE Online team after playing the game for 10 years. And that was a fascinating conversation where he basically said that to him, permanence of a game, which is similar to a game being memorable, of course, really just comes from the people you meet, the interactions you've had. It's sort of, I guess, a bit like evergreen content. Once you've got a player base around a game, it's the players that will keep that game interesting. I think it's the sign of a very good team-based game that it's really the people playing it who make you want to come back and the interactions you're having with them. But earlier, Sam was speaking about these game mechanics all being used up. I think certainly as far as technology goes, we're seeing some really impressive advances, but also limited returns, for me at least, about how impressed I am by them anymore. It's getting easier and easier to make very realistic looking games, and to be honest, to make them just handle very nicely. Like I can download movement mechanics for a player character from GitHub, and it's not so difficult to just do a cookie cutter code for that. Please don't do that, by the way. There's probably legalities involved, but it's not so difficult anymore. Making a great game remains incredibly difficult. And what comes to mind is not necessarily a technological innovation here, but I've been a fan of horror games for a long time, and Amnesia: The Dark Descent was probably the first horror game that I really loved. And the graphics were fine. I would say they were just average for the period. My memory is a little hazy, but I think they were just average for the period. It didn't have massive technological innovations, but it did feel like a new kind of horror as I was playing it. So it used the same gameplay mechanics that Resident Evil had, where basically resources are limited and sometimes it's the best strategy to run away from enemies. But the way it implemented this gave this game such a reputation that even when I was just booting up the game and walking through an empty castle at the beginning, all of the game design had come together to make me just know something scary's coming, and just this empty castle's atmosphere had me like in a cold sweat after about 10 minutes. I basically just stopped playing the game for the night before I'd even seen a monster. And when you do see a monster, it is quite intense. The game's built you up to it. So while the technology is giving limited returns, in my opinion, I think there's still plenty of space to just do something innovative or different, and that can be really memorable.
Edwin, I really hate horror games. I'm so sorry. No, I'm really not good with horror games. I remember I was watching the Let's Plays of Resident Evil 7. I watched through the entire Let's Play. So I almost studied it because I was so determined, okay, I will buy this game and I will actually play it. And I knew at which corner what monster would come. I kind of like cataloged it almost. And then I put the game in, and in the beginning, there's a scene where you just start to enter a house. And I knew, okay, there's no monster going to come outside of the house. There's no monster going to appear inside of the house until a very specific point. And then, spoiler alert, there's a monster that's coming up the stairs. And I knew all of that, and I still couldn't make it into the house just because of like the whole ambience and so on. So what, of course, happened is that I kind of forced my friend to then play it. So I had another Let's Play. But yeah, I just can't do horror games for some reason. For me, that kind of almost segues into another topic, which for me is authenticity, where players can sense when a moment feels manufactured or forced. And for me, the best gaming moments come from a place of sincerity. It's like putting yourself, or well, myself as a game developer, in the player's shoes and asking, what will they feel here?
I think understanding your players' motivations, what they're going to do, and why they're playing your game becomes so important from that perspective, especially if you do want to create impressive set-piece moments in a game. Things like perfect action scenes where everything flows together, the difficulty's just right, and there's this perfect harmony of visuals, maybe it's a climactic moment in the plot, the sound, gameplay all come together, and just what you're doing feels epic. That is very difficult to achieve, and you really need to know exactly what your player's going to do. My assumption would be that for these larger games, they just do a whole bunch of playtesting and monitor their players' routes and how difficult they can make things. So maybe some listeners remember there's a temple sequence in Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. I think the area, actually I'll admit I had to look this up, is called the City's Secret. You just escape a high-speed chase with a helicopter. It's got like these miniguns. It's pretty epic. There's grappling. The visuals are going crazy. And suddenly you're in this really tranquil, beautiful temple, solving puzzles. For me, that contrast, this adrenaline, it felt like I was playing a film. And then this moment of awe, that really stuck in my memory. Other technological feats do still stick in my memory occasionally. I remember on the PS3, I just gotten a new PlayStation 3, and I think the first game I booted up on it was Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction. I don't think it's actually talked about that much, but it's very impressive to watch, or back then it was, a rail grinding scene around a crumbling building in Metropolis. In 2007, that level of graphical detail and complexity really blew me away, partly because I was a willing accomplice to this effect. I wanted to see what can my PS3 do. So I was like completely on board with the developers, and perhaps the developers also understood this is a game releasing reasonably early in the PS3's life cycle, and people want to see and experience that. Like, let's push this technology. Some of these technological things did stick with me, having said, like, it's all about mechanics and subtler things.
A lot of these memorable game moments, I think, are also part of the marketing and sales cycles of games. I know that recently when Sony PlayStation was really trying to push its hardware, it had these marquee titles with God of War. These modern God of War releases are so epic compared to the way God of War started off as a hack and slash. I mean, you have Kratos running up and down these gigantic Titan behemoth monsters, where the body of this monster or god ends up becoming the level, and you're fighting it, and it just makes for such great cinematic action sequences, like you were saying, Edwin. I also think what's interesting is we were talking about horror games earlier, and And Resident Evil is really the gold standard for horror games. And I remember the first time I played Resident Evil 1, I really couldn't even get past the first few rooms because the whole experience was just so terrifying for me. And I have to admit, all of the remaining Resident Evils, I've just been watching Let's Plays on YouTube as kind of like, I'm too scared to play this thing, but I'm happy to go through it. And when it also comes to redefining the genre of horror survival games, I think the Dead Space series is also really wonderful because it takes this, I love space horror. I mean, I think it's terrifying. Again, I haven't played Dead Space because I'm just too scared, but watching those Let's Plays go through it is so satisfying because you get to have all the fear, but you don't have to freak out about the controls and the physical actions and the inputs trying to get your character to get through the level. I know that's really hard.
Since we talked so much about PlayStation, I feel memorable gaming moments are also timeless moments. With 3 decades of PlayStation, they have this launching sound whenever you boot up the PlayStation, and they just brought it back kind of maybe even as a gimmick, but I feel like there's so much positive connotation with just that sound and hearing that. I feel like these are also these small little details that players return to when they think about why they love games. And I have to admit, I've never found a similar experience to what I was experiencing back when I was young and playing Ragnarok online and like ruining that experience for everyone. Not that thing in particular, but the overall experience. And maybe at one point, I might actually go and create something similar or a similar experience for newer audiences that have never experienced this old game. Because if you would try to give this really old game to someone nowadays, they would probably feel very awkward with it because the controls are kind of feeling outdated. There's so much that you would need to modernize. This is for me also what I believe many other developers get inspired by, where they feel like, oh wow, I really enjoyed that experience when I was a young kid, but nowadays maybe there is no such a game anymore, so I just need to do it myself and build that game myself. Of course, I'm heavily biased, but these memorable moments are what push the medium forward for me, proving that games aren't just entertainment. They're experiences, connection, and sometimes even life-changing. I'm just thinking about all the people that found their loved ones through games, like World of Warcraft. And for me, these moments are what makes all the hard work worth it and what keeps me passionate about the endless possibility of gaming.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Jacky, in terms of these classic, absolutely iconic and foundational things within gaming that are now kind of seeing resurgence in this modern era. We look at games like Animal Crossing, and Animal Crossing has been such a successful franchise. So, I mean, even if players are experiencing Animal Crossing New Horizons for the first time, there were all these previous Animal Crossing games. Even the latest Pokemon, I think we're on Scarlet and Violet right now. I mean, I played Red and Blue and Pokemon, Yellow. So really, and also talking about these Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy VII games were such a good core foundation of RPGs that I feel like it's always going to be memorable for players. I'm also cautious of my inherent bias because a lot of retro games, I played a lot of very old early games, not just to date myself. And so I'm very careful about how I equate memorability with originality or significance or impact. Just because certain things are memorable or impactful for me doesn't necessarily mean they're not special to anyone else in this current or future era of gaming. And so, I don't want to invalidate that for other players, but I think that what makes a game really beautiful and really memorable is even games that I've never played before can have moments of memorability because they have such a high and a wonderful impact on the greater player community.
But in a way, nostalgia is pretty eternal. So I was speaking to a game developer who was saying he finds it kind of weird that his kid of 16 is nostalgic for Roblox. It's like, yeah, that to me, that's still a new game. But nostalgia is a pretty universal experience. And I think some of that nostalgia really gets to the core of just spending time with a game, being influenced by a game, and just feeling love for that game. So it's rather than a specific moment, unlike these high octane gaming sequences full of plot, movement, and action that I've mentioned, I think a lot of my most cherished moments from games aren't actually anything specific, like just riding Epona through the plains of Hyrule, which actually I think that reference isn't too dated because you can still do it in newer Zeldas. Anyway, or looking up at the stained glass window in Peach's Castle. That one probably is more dated because that, unlocked that special level in Mario 64. Or just rampaging in Grand Theft Auto. There we go. That'll remain up to date for a while. Like just standing around or grinding in RuneScape 2 or Guild Wars, or just clearing final levels and that feeling you were talking about of feeling like you've mastered a mechanic or like you've accomplished something with your game. Like the ending of Killzone 2 or the last battle in Black on PS2, which a bit more niche, but they were both pretty tough. Maybe not notoriously tough, but they felt like, something had happened. And it's a kind of just from spending time with that game and loving the game itself, those moments became significant because it just caps off your experience.
I think whoever you are and wherever you are, a memorable game moment is always going to be that thing that sticks with you for a really long time. A cutscene that really stuck with me was the first time many, many years ago when I played Final Fantasy VII. There's this moment in the game where a giant sea monster called the Sapphire Weapon attacks a town. And because of the cinematics and the storytelling and what was going on in the game and in that scene, I won't spoil it. But it was really, a moment that made me as a kid go, wow. And it just stuck with me forever. And I always, go back to it and watch that cutscene on YouTube every once in a while. What I also think is very cool about it being so memorable is we now have Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I haven't yet seen that scene be remade yet. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know if it's even done or it's even out. But we'll see. I have to go look it up. But that to me is what is really wonderful about having memorable game moments.
Yeah, I agree. Edwin, when you just said GTA, actually a memory came to me of my mom coming into my room when I was young and playing GTA 2. And whenever she would come into my room, she would see me driving a car and, getting stuck in a traffic jam or something like that. And she would then go like, oh, Jacky, this game is so amazing. You can finally learn how to drive a car and you will train for your driver's license. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I'm training for my driver's license over here. And she completely bought it. They never, went in and corrected it. And whenever she would see me play the game, she would actually be like super proud and go like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you that you're already training. So as a developer and as a mentor, I often encourage others to think about the moments they want to create for players, right? Of course, I believe the GTA team didn't anticipate that specific moment, but asking the question, what will they remember? What will the player remember? What will make them laugh, cry, or be surprised, And these questions should be at the heart of every design decision, at least for me. Because at the end of the day, it's not the graphics or the mechanics that players remember the most, it's how a game made them feel.
And those most memorable moments, just like you were saying, Jacky, can be unpredictable because they're about how you, the player, interacted with the game. Although two people would rarely have exactly the same special memories of the same game, we can all understand and feel why those moments were special to them. And in that way, I think these memories are reaching something core about our psyche. In a way, it feels like my cherished memories are kind of universal, because they're just moments when games felt like they were being a game in the best ways possible.
And what would be really memorable is that if you followed us on all our socials. That's right, you can join the conversation by tagging us at The Gentleland on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Gentleland. Have any questions or comments about the show? Send us an email, podcast@gentleland.net.
Be sure to let us know what you think about today's episode on social media. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with your friends. We are glad you were able to join us to hear about our memorable game moments. Tell us about your most memorable moments in games. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us for the Gentleland Show.